Today, we uncover what happened to 5 people who underestimated the animals they encountered. From a visitor who underestimated the capabilities of monitor lizards to a man who forgot common protocols on handling reticulated pythons. But first, we begin in Yellowstone's Lamar Valley, where Daniel Reeves stepped past the boundary, and a 700-pound grizzly closed the distance in roughly 3 seconds. It was May 14th, 2016. Late morning brought clear skies and moderate temperatures to the national park, with foot traffic beginning to thin as the day progressed past the busy dawn hours. A gentle breeze carried the sulfuric scent from nearby thermal features across the boardwalk system that guided visitors through the geologically active landscape. Daniel R. Reeves, 28, worked as a commercial electrician from suburban Colorado, specializing in industrial installations that required precise attention to safety protocols. His methodical approach to problem-solving served him well in his profession, but his tendency to test boundaries had caused workplace incidents before, including 2 safety violations that had resulted in supervisor warnings. This marked his second visit to the park, having planned the trip around optimal weather conditions for photography. The Lamar Valley stretched before him, a sweeping wildlife corridor where warning signs were posted at regular intervals, specifying minimum distances of 100 yards from all bears. These animals, weighing up to 700 pounds and capable of reaching speeds of 35 miles per hour in short bursts. Daniel had documented the scene from the designated roadside pullout, capturing several photographs with his telephoto lens, but observed another group briefly step beyond the boundary without consequence. The family had ventured perhaps 10 feet past the orange markers, taken quick selfies, and returned to the gravel without incident. The boundary began to feel negotiable. Daniel's professional experience with electrical safety had taught him that regulations often included excessive safety margins, and he had developed a habit of pushing limits when the immediate danger seemed minimal. The bear appeared absorbed in foraging, indifferent to the cluster of tourists watching from a distance. He had closed to roughly 60 feet, picking his way along a slight elevation above the valley floor that he believed gave him a positional advantage, and had caused him to misjudge how directly he now stood in the animal's space. A shallow, brush-choked depression between his position and the tree line had obscured the bear's precise location during his approach, compressing the effective distance without his awareness. The wind, which had been moving across his path, shifted behind him without warning, carrying his scent directly toward the tree line. The grizzly's head snapped up a moment later, not in the slow, scanning motion of curiosity, but with the sudden, locked precision of an animal that had registered a threat at close range without prior awareness of its approach. The bear rose onto its haunches briefly, small, dark eyes fixing on Daniel with an immediacy that had nothing exploratory in it. A sharp, percussive huff expelled from its chest. Its front paws dropped back to the earth with a weight that compressed the ground beneath them, and its head sank low between its shoulders. The posture wildlife biologists consistently identify as the final physical indicator before a defensive charge. These were textbook warning signals that Daniel either missed or dismissed. His photography had captured bears at a distance behaving similarly before turning away, and he had mistaken prior stillness for tolerance. The charge covered the distance in roughly 3 seconds, fast enough that recognition came before reaction, but not enough time for either. The ground seemed to collapse under it as it came, not a sprint built over distance, but an explosion from stillness. There was no bluff in the movement, no curved, arcing approach, just a direct, explosive line of fur and muscle that collapsed any possibility of reaction. What followed was not prolonged. The first impact drove Daniel backward off the slight elevation, the bear's full mass landing across his torso as they met the ground. The compression was catastrophic. The air left his lungs with a sound witnesses later described as involuntary, almost mechanical. He did not cry out. The bear, rather than immediately disengaging as it might have at greater distance, and with a target that offered no continued resistance, registered the fallen figure as an unresolved threat and followed through. The mauling lasted less than 40 seconds by the account of 2 witnesses watching from the pullout, both of whom were too distant and too stunned to intervene. One attempted to deploy bear spray, but was well outside effective range. The animal retreated to the tree line in a stiff-legged walk when it was done, pausing once to look back before disappearing into the timber. Rangers arrived within 11 minutes of the emergency emergency call. They found Daniel Reeves face down in the shallow drainage depression running along the valley's edge, his camera equipment scattered across the grass and gravel around him. The injuries were consistent with massive thoracic trauma, cervical damage from the initial impact, and blood loss from lacerations that no field intervention could have meaningfully addressed. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The bear was located the following morning by aerial survey. The incident report noted that the animal had behaved in a manner entirely consistent with the defensive response to an encroaching human at close range, and that no prior aggression had been documented in its history. The necropsy revealed no neurological abnormality, no disease, no prior injury that might explain atypical aggression. It had done what the species does. Park authorities opened a formal review. The cited violations, approach distance, failure to carry bear spray, and movement that placed him upwind and above the animal, were each individually documented in the signage he had passed on his way to the pullout. The fines that would have been levied were instead absorbed into a wrongful death case that went nowhere because the signs had been clear, the warnings explicit, and the choice entirely his own. Daniel's mistake was crossing a line that was clearly marked, but for Marcus Hale, he was drawing one that shouldn't have existed at all. That day was August 3rd, 2014. The afternoon air hung humid and still around the Brisbane outskirts, with temperatures climbing toward the seasonal peak as storm clouds gathered on the horizon. The atmospheric pressure had dropped noticeably, creating the oppressive conditions that often preceded late summer thunderstorms in subtropical Queensland. Marcus Hale, 35, managed inventory systems for a regional distribution company that specialized in agricultural supplies. His systematic nature extended to personal projects, including detailed documentation of wildlife activity on his semi-rural property that bordered undeveloped bushland. The 5-acre plot had attracted various native species since his purchase 18 months earlier. The large lace monitor first appeared 3 weeks before the incident, emerging from the bushland during late afternoon hours to scavenge around the property's edges. These powerful lizards, growing up to 6 feet in length, possessed sharp claws and strong jaws designed for tearing flesh from the carrion. Their mouths harbored dense colonies of bacteria accumulated through years of contact with decomposing matter, a biological reality that made even a non-fatal bite a serious medical event if left untreated. Marcus's initial response followed recommended protocols for wildlife encounters. He maintained distance, observed from windows, and avoided any interaction that might alter the animal's behavior. However, curiosity about the lizard's feeding preferences led him to begin leaving meat scraps at the property's rear boundary. The incident occurred during what Marcus intended as a culminating documentation session. Rather than dropping raw chicken from his usual distance of approximately 10 feet, he decided to record the feeding interaction at closer range, holding the meat by hand while activating his phone's camera function. The lizard's lunge targeted the food source with mechanical precision, learned through weeks of conditioning. Its powerful legs propelled the reptile forward faster than Marcus expected, claws engaging automatically for stability as powerful jaws locked onto both meat and the attached hand. Marcus hesitated rather than releasing immediately, his instinct being to retain control of the situation rather than surrender the food. This resistance triggered the animal's natural feeding response, intensifying the bite pressure and claw engagement as the lizard interpreted his grip as competition for the resource. The monitor's claws penetrated through skin and into underlying tissue as the animal sought better purchase on what it perceived as a struggling meal. Tearing occurred when he finally pulled back against the lizard's grip. Blood loss was immediate and substantial, the wounds extending through multiple tissue layers, including damage to tendons that controlled finger movement. The deep puncture wounds, contaminated with the bacteria the animal carried as a matter of biology, had introduced an infection that would prove as dangerous as the injuries themselves. His phone had been knocked from his grip during the struggle and lay face down in the grass several feet away. The screen cracked, unresponsive when he finally reached it with his undamaged hand. The wounds to his dominant hand prevented the fine motor control required to operate the device, even had it functioned. He made it to the rear gate before blood, loss, and shock brought him down. A passing motorist noticed the gate ajar the following morning and called emergency services. Marcus was alive when paramedics reached him, barely, and not in any condition to explain what had happened. He was transported to hospital, where the attending physicians initially assessed his prognosis as guarded but survivable. The infection progressed rapidly. Bacteria commonly present in monitor lizard saliva, including aggressive soft tissue pathogens, had entered deep tissue during the bite. By the time treatment began, early necrotizing infection had already taken hold. Despite intravenous antibiotics, tissue breakdown advanced faster than it could be contained. By the third day, he was confused and difficult to rouse. By the fifth, the systemic involvement had progressed beyond what intervention could reverse. The coroner later determined the cause of death was septic shock, resulting from untreated infection introduced during the attack. Report noted that earlier medical attention, had it been accessible in the hours immediately following the incident, would likely have altered the outcome. Marcus spent 3 weeks teaching a wild animal to trust him, but for Tyler Jenkins, he had less than 3 minutes and far less sobriety before he made his. It was July 22nd, 2017. Just after midnight, low tide had exposed extensive shallow areas along the county beach, with minimal wind creating unusually calm surf conditions under a clear sky studded with bright stars. The water temperature remained warm from the day's heating, encouraging late-night activities among visitors who sought to avoid crowds and heat. Tyler Jenkins, 23, worked construction during seasonal employment gaps. He had spent the evening consuming alcohol with 3 companions at a beachside establishment over a 4-hour period, with his intake estimated at 8 to 10 drinks. His alcohol tolerance, developed through regular social drinking, masked the full extent of his impairment, allowing him to function with apparent normalcy despite significantly compromised judgment. Their group had been walking the exposed tidal zone for approximately 30 minutes when flashlight beams illuminated a shark moving through knee-deep water near the shoreline. The animal, later identified as a subadult blacktip shark, approximately 5 to 6 feet in length, was following normal shallow water movement patterns. Blacktip sharks regularly utilize shallow coastal waters for feeding during nighttime hours, and these encounters with humans typically result in no interaction, as the sharks are focused on hunting and generally avoid contact with large moving objects. The animal appeared to be navigating the shallow area rather than experiencing distress, but alcohol-impaired judgment led to misinterpretation of the situation. Multiple voices suggested intervention, with theories ranging from the shark being stranded by the tide to speculation about injury or disorientation. Tyler moved first, motivated by a combination of alcohol-induced bravado and genuine belief that the animal required assistance. His approach through the shallow water created significant disturbance, with splashing and movement that likely startled the shark and triggered its defensive instincts. Grasping the shark's tail section seemed logical to Tyler's impaired reasoning, representing what appeared to be a safe contact point away from the animal's teeth. His understanding of shark anatomy and flexibility, however, proved inadequate for the situation he had created. The shark's flexibility exceeded his expectations, bending in a tight curve that demonstrated the incredible spinal mobility that allowed these predators to maneuver effectively in confined spaces. Tyler's grip remained locked despite the shark's movement, his alcohol-impaired reflexes too slow to respond to the rapidly changing situation. The bite landed on his left hand, but the shark, now fully agitated by sustained restraint in shallow water with no retreat available, struck a second time as Tyler stumbled and pitched forward. The second bite struck high on the inner thigh, opening major vessels and causing rapid blood loss. His companions reacted within seconds, pulling him upright and moving toward shore. One removed his belt and attempted a tourniquet at the upper thigh, but the wound's location and depth made effective compression difficult to achieve in the field. In the dark, with wet hands, Tyler remained conscious and speaking for several minutes, his impairment making it difficult for him to fully register the severity of what his companions could see clearly. He lost consciousness before they reached the vehicle access point. Emergency services arrived within 20 minutes of the call, but found him unresponsive at the waterline line, where his companions had stopped moving him on the advice of the emergency dispatcher. Resuscitation was attempted and continued for 17 minutes before being discontinued. The incident report noted that no single element of the encounter was individually decisive. The beach location, the time of night, the absence of emergency equipment among the group, the alcohol impairing both Tyler's judgment and his companion's ability to execute effective first aid. Each factor had compounded the next. The shark had been gone from the shallows within minutes of the encounter, continuing its feeding pattern along the tidal zone. Tyler's judgment was chemically compromised. Claire Donnelly's had no such excuse, just a camera, a plastic bag, and a courtyard full of animals that had seen it all before. November 9th, 2015. Midday heat had driven most visitors toward shaded areas of the temple complex, though temperatures remained comfortable under partly cloudy skies with light winds from the southeast. The ancient structure, carved from sandstone centuries earlier, provided natural cooling in its covered walkways and courtyards. Claire Donnelly, 31, worked as a marketing coordinator for a mid-sized consulting firm that specialized in digital strategy implementation. Her focus on photography and social media documentation during travel often distracted from environmental awareness. This marked her first visit to Southeast Asia, part of a planned 3-week tour covering multiple countries and cultural sites. Her research had focused primarily on historical significance and photographic opportunities rather than practical safety considerations or wildlife interaction guidelines. The temple complex housed several hundred macaques that had adapted to human presence over generations of tourist activity, developing sophisticated behavioral patterns centered around food acquisition. The plastic bag Claire carried triggered an immediate and powerful stimulus response. Years of conditioning had taught the animals to associate bags, particularly plastic ones, with food. Availability. Multiple warning signs posted throughout the grounds provided explicit instructions regarding interaction protocols with the macaque population, emphasizing the importance of avoiding visible food containers, maintaining appropriate distances, and understanding escalation patterns. Claire had photographed several of these signs as examples of local safety culture, but her focus on documentation rather than comprehension meant the practical implications failed to register. Her professional habit of treating signage as aesthetic elements rather than functional communication created a dangerous gap in situational awareness. The initial grab occurred within seconds of Claire entering the main courtyard, where approximately 20 macaques were distributed across various elevated and ground-level positions. A single adult male targeted the bag with practiced efficiency, its eyes having fixed on the plastic the moment she entered the courtyard. Its movement was precise and confident in a way that suggested extensive experience. Claire's instinctive pullback activated escalation responses, her resistance interpreted as direct challenge to the animal's acquisition rights. A second animal joined the interaction within moments, followed by a third, the situation cascading as individual animals responded to motion, sound, and opportunity. The bag tore under multiple pressures, contents scattering across the stone courtyard and creating additional stimulus points that attracted further animal attention. Claire turned to disengage from the primary interaction, the sudden movement sending a brief wave of disorientation through her as the chaos of sound and motion closed in from multiple directions. She did not see the steps behind her. The stone staircase at the courtyard's eastern edge was uneven, worn smooth by centuries of foot traffic, and she was moving backward and without sight of what was behind her when her heel caught the raised lip of the uppermost step. The fall was not from height. 4 steps, perhaps a meter of elevation, but she landed across the corner of the lower balustrade at the base of the staircase, the impact concentrating at the base of her skull with a force that the medical examiner would later describe as non-survivable, regardless of response time. Temple staff arrived within 90 seconds and dispersed the troop. Claire was breathing shallowly when the first staff member reached her, but lost responsiveness within minutes. Emergency services were called immediately, but the injury was not one that intervention could reverse. The coroner's findings attributed death to blunt force cranial trauma resulting from the fall, with the macaque contact listed as a contributing circumstance rather than the direct cause. The distinction, medically precise, offered little practical comfort. She had walked into the courtyard, carrying everything the signs had warned her not to carry, and the chain of events had proceeded, with a logic that was, in retrospect, difficult to argue with. Claire ignored the warnings entirely, but in the next story, they read everything and still walked into the same trap wearing a different shape. October 18th, 2013. Late afternoon brought comfortable temperatures and partly cloudy conditions to the park grounds, with tourist density remaining high due to favorable weather and weekend timing. The ancient parkland, established centuries earlier around natural deer populations, had evolved into a carefully managed ecosystem where wildlife and human activity coexisted. Ethan Cole, 40, worked in financial analysis for a mid-sized investment firm, where his systematic approach to data interpretation had earned recognition and advancement over a 15-year career. His preparation had included detailed study of the monkey park's visitor protocols, including the recommended stillness and averted gaze posture used to signal non-threatening intent to the macaque population before offering food. However, his research had focused on cultural and historical framing rather than the practical behavioral mechanics underpinning those guidelines. The macaque population, numbering over 200 individuals across the mountain park's forested slopes, had been shaped by decades of managed human interaction within the sanctuary boundaries. These animals had developed behavioral patterns that differed significantly from their wild counterparts, with feeding responses conditioned through thousands of daily interactions. The learned response loop operated on social logic, reinforced through countless repetitions: human stillness, visual signal of food, controlled approach, immediate reward, peaceful withdrawal. Ethan replicated the recommended stillness and lowered gaze accurately based on his research and observation of other visitors, his posture matching the non-confrontational form that signaled passive intent to the troop. His execution of the behavioral signal was precise, but his understanding of the underlying social transaction remained incomplete. A mid-ranking adult male responded according to conditioned patterns, breaking from the group and approaching with the loose, unhurried gait that indicated recognized food-sharing intent. The animal's movement was confident and direct, demonstrating complete comfort with human proximity. Instead of completing the food transfer promptly, Ethan hesitated, motivated by the desire to extend the moment and adjust his camera angle for a better photograph, a significant deviation from the interaction contract the macaque had learned to expect. The animal paused, then resumed its approach, closing the remaining distance and reaching toward Ethan's closed hand in the standard first escalation gesture. When Ethan shifted his weight and partially turned his body while keeping the food enclosed in his fist, the macaque's assessment recalibrated. The threat vocalization drew immediate responses from two nearby individuals further up the slope that the initial interaction had not involved. What park staff later reconstructed from witness accounts and their own arrival on scene was a cascade that moved faster than the standard intervention protocols were designed to address. The dominant male bit into his forearm, the opening signal interpreted by surrounding animals not as a contained dominance exchange, but as an active conflict requiring group response. Ethan's instinctive recoil brought two additional animals into contact range within seconds. He went down on the stone pathway when the initial male struck at his leg, and the fall changed the geometry of the encounter entirely. He did not land cleanly. His head struck the edge of the stone path with a force that witnesses described as audible from several meters away. The macaques, responding to the sudden stillness of a figure that had been moving and resisting moments before, disengaged with the same speed with which they had escalated and retreated to the slope above. Staff arrived with noise deterrents within approximately 2 minutes. Ethan was unconscious when they reached him and did not regain consciousness during transport. Imaging confirmed severe intracranial hemorrhage from the impact with the stone surface. Surgical intervention was attempted. He died 4 hours later. The immediate cause of death was recorded as traumatic brain injury secondary to blunt force impact sustained during the fall. The park's post-incident review identified no no failure in staff response time and no deviation from established protocols. The animals had behaved in ways entirely consistent with their documented behavioral patterns. Every encounter so far involved a wild animal in its environment, operating on instincts shaped by nature and conditioning. But in the next story, someone brought his inside the garage and made the same mistake the others had. He underestimated what he was holding. March 2nd, 2018. Evening brought calm conditions and comfortable temperatures to the residential area, with clear skies providing adequate natural lighting through the concrete garage's open door. The suburban setting offered privacy, though the isolation that made it attractive also eliminated the safety benefits of immediate assistance availability. Alan Cruz, 27, worked in telecommunications, specializing in network infrastructure maintenance that required technical precision and adherence to safety protocols. The 4-meter reticulated python had been acquired through private channels 3 weeks earlier, representing Alan's entry into large constrictor ownership after years of maintaining smaller snake species. His experience base included several years working with ball pythons and corn snakes, but the scale differential created challenges that his previous experience had not adequately addressed. Reticulated pythons rank among the world's longest snake species, with adults commonly exceeding 4 meters and weights reaching over 30 kilograms. These powerful constrictors possess muscular systems designed to subdue prey significantly larger than themselves, with coiling pressure capable of exceeding human tolerance thresholds within seconds of application. Standard protocol for large constrictor handling required a second person present at all times with specific responsibilities, including monitoring the snake's head position, providing emergency assistance, and maintaining communication with emergency services if situations developed beyond handler control capabilities. The snake's placement across his shoulders followed techniques commonly demonstrated in online videos, but Alan allowed the midsection to hang freely while maintaining inadequate control of the head section. The behavior was not predatory, but mechanical, a stability response that escalated into full constriction. The first loop formed across Alan's upper chest as the snake anchored itself for stability, normal positioning behavior for constrictors held in elevated positions, designed to prevent falls and provide security for animals that had evolved to navigate complex three-dimensional environments. One loop anchored against his back and shoulder, giving the snake leverage it would not have had on flat ground. Alan's laughter indicated misinterpretation of this as harmless repositioning rather than recognition of the beginning stages of constriction. His focus on the recording equipment distracted attention from critical safety monitoring. The second loop followed within seconds, creating sustained pressure across his chest that began to restrict breathing and limit his range of movement. Pressure increased automatically, each movement met with a fractional tightening, the coils adjusting to maintain pressure and control. By the time disengagement efforts began, multiple coils had engaged across his torso and the compression had progressed beyond the threshold at which solo removal was physically possible. He could not reach his phone. The device sat propped against the wheel of his car 6 feet away, still recording, its screen facing him. The relative who found him arrived approximately 40 minutes after the recording began, alerted by nothing specific. A feeling, she told investigators, that something was wrong. The snake had not moved significantly from its position. Alan was on his knees against the garage wall. Having managed to brace himself there at some point during the 40 minutes, a posture the forensic analysis suggested he had held for a significant portion of the time before losing consciousness. He had not fallen, which the pathologist noted was unusual and indicated sustained voluntary muscular effort for longer than expected given the degree of compression. Cause of death was recorded as asphyxiation, secondary to constriction. The recording on his phone captured 9 minutes of audio before the sounds became ambiguous and then stopped. Investigators did not release its contents,